Section 8 of Early Greek Philosophy by Alfred William Benn. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain, read by Pamela Nagami. Chapter 3, The Analytical Philosophers, Part 2. 6. Glimpses of Modern Science. Like his Ionian predecessors, the wonder-working Acrogantine poet has a place in the history of science, no less than in the history of philosophy. He divined the truth that light travels with an appreciable velocity. He knew that the revolution of one body round another can only be maintained by the composition of two forces, a centrifugal and a centripetal, and he recognized the sexual reproduction of plants. He even suggested the famous doctrine of the non-survival of the unfit, afterwards borrowed from him by Lucretius. And if we could take the account already referred to of his triumphal progress through Sicily as less an expression of intoxicated personal vanity than a dream of the victories in store for human knowledge, no Greek would be so justly entitled to the name of a prophet. 7. Melissus. Empedocles founded no school. After him the scene changes once more to East Hellas, and the language of philosophy relapses from poetry to sober prose. But through all external vicissitudes, the new method of infinitesimal analysis is maintained, leading to fresh conquests in the invisible world. Change of scene was indeed the best possible security for continued progress. It saved speculation from sinking into a routine. Unlike Moab, the Greek genius did not settle on its lees, but was emptied from vessel to vessel, escaping the reproach of a taste that remains and a scent that is not changed. In East Hellas, as in Sicily, the problem was to reconcile Heracleitus with Parmenides, the theory of an unceasing flux with the theory of an unchanging reality. We may assume that the Ephesian philosophy was well known and widely canvassed in those parts ever since its first introduction, seeing that its fame had spread within a few years to Italy. And we have proof positive that the Eleatic philosophy was studied in Ionia by a contemporary of Empedocles, the Samian admiral Melissus, who defeated an Athenian fleet in the year 440 B.C. This remarkable man, the only speculative sailor mentioned in all history, wrote a prose treatise of which considerable fragments survive, reproducing the main ideas of Parmenides with some important variations. Unlike the master, he declared that the eternal reality was without a bound, identifying it, as would seem, with infinite space, and while denying movement or multiplicity to absolute being, he allows them at least a place in thought as illusions of sense. Such an enlargement of view meant much. How much will be apparent when we come to study the grandest result of early Greek thought, the atomic theory. 8. Atomism. Before explaining how the theory of atoms arose, let me explain what it means. Atomism implies, first of all, that matter, or the substance of which bodies are composed, while it occupies space and is therefore extended, is not, like pure space, continuous, but discrete. That is, it consists of perfectly distinct and separate parts moving about in void space, solid, indivisible, impenetrable, differing from one another only in size and shape, capable of being united together in mechanical groups, but only communicating with one another by external contact and collision. In the next place, the atoms are so small as to lie beyond the reach of our senses, but assuming space to be infinitely extended, they are infinite in number, for otherwise the universe would in the course of infinite ages have disappeared by dissipation into the surrounding void. They are also eternal, or the least tendency to decay acting through endless time, would equally have involved their total annihilation before the present date. And being indestructible, there is no reason to suppose that they ever began to exist, not to mention the general inconceivability that out of nothing something could arise. Evidently, the atom of Greek philosophy is an incomparably more meager idea than the atom of modern science with its formidable outfit of energies, conceived as endowed with gravitation, cohesion, elasticity, radioactivity, electromagnetic properties, and chemical affinities. At the same time, we must remember that all this elaborate mechanism has been built up, stone by stone, on the simple foundation supplied by the constructive genius of two Ionian Greeks, Leucippus, whose birthplace is unknown, and Democritus, a native of Abdera on the barbarous Thracian coast, enjoying little popularity in their lifetime and unhonored after death, even by the inheritors who traded most successfully on their discoveries. 9. Leucippus. From the scanty information supplied to us on the subject, it appears that Leucippus, the real founder of atomism, lived a little after Empedocles and Melissus. Generalizing from the doctrine of subtle material emanations as the cause of external perception put forward by the one, he would form the conception of multitudinous invisible particles as the basis of all real existence, and the infinite space of the other, dissociated from its material contents, would supply him with the equally essential conception of a void, giving full scope for their movement and interplay. By a remarkable anticipation of what is now called atomicity, he supposed that these particles, or at least some of them, were supplied with little hooks by which they became woven into chains and membranes, ultimately forming, so to speak, the cell wall of a closed universe, within which the cosmic evolution of order out of chaos was conducted. Nothing, he said, happens by chance, everything by law and necessity, or, as we should say, by purely mechanical causation. For the original cause of motion, Greek atomism refers us to weight, which at that time seemed to be an inseparable quality of matter. It had not yet been discovered that the fall of heavy bodies was connected with a tendency to move towards the center of the earth, nor was it known that bodies falling in a vacuum move with equal velocities, so that collisions between them cannot occur. Accordingly, Leucippus credited all his atoms alike with a downward motion through infinite space, and he supposed that the larger atoms, having a greater velocity than the smaller, would overtake, collide, and become entangled with them. As the knowledge of astronomy and physics spread, the inconsistency of this primitive atomism with natural law came to be understood, and therefore no man of science after Democritus ever adopted it in antiquity, although the contrary has been stated by ill-informed literary critics in our own day. 10. Democritus. Democritus seems to have adopted the atomic theory of Leucippus without any essential modification. What distinguishes him as a philosopher is the enormous range of his interests. We have seen that the love of knowledge for its own sake was recognized at a very early time as the characteristic feature in philosophy. Democritus expressed this passion vividly by saying, "I had rather discover a single new explanation than be king of Persia." But his ambition went beyond a knowledge of things which taken alone is merely science. He asked, what was the nature of knowledge itself, thus giving a still wider extension to philosophy, of which that question has ever since formed an integral part. And he seems to have been the first to point out the distinction, since grown so familiar, between the two great sources of knowledge: sense, which gives us the appearances, and understanding, which gives us the reality of things. He owed it to the atomic theory. Atomism is a reasonable inference from our sensations, but at the same time, in a way, it denies them. As he puts it, sweet and bitter, hot and cold, exist by convention, or as we now say, subjectively. Color exists by convention, in reality, atoms and the void. So little truth is there in the reproach commonly brought against the materialists, of whom Democritus was a precursor, that they believe nothing but the evidence of their senses. 11. Moral philosophy. Philosophy, however, is not complete, even when we have added a theory of knowing to our theory of being. Man is by nature not only contemplative, but active, and even more active than contemplative. Accordingly, if we would attain true universality, to those other theories, a theory of practice must be added. And just as he who takes all knowledge for his province must needs simplify the task by an effort of extreme generalization, by going back to first principles, by singling out the fundamental element, or the original cause, or the widest law of things, or again by fixing on the true criterion of knowledge, so also the supreme master of practice will make it his object to pick out from the infinite details of social intercourse, politics, industry, and fine art, the absolute end to which everything else is a means, which alone gives a real value to all those multifarious activities. In a word, as the later Greeks put it, after physics and logic comes ethics, or the philosophy of conduct. It proves the wonderful genius of Democritus as a systemizing thinker that he took not only the second step, but the third. Here also, as in the case of the Milesian school, with their general theories of the world as a natural growth, the absence of an organized priesthood teaching a fixed theology was essential to speculative freedom. After the first outburst of scientific speculation, there had indeed been a danger that the great religious revival we call Orphicism might intervene to check its further progress, at least in the direction of bringing conduct also under natural law. And not to speak of the Pythagoreans, there are very marked symptoms in Empedocles of a desire to keep well with the mystical movement, a nervous anxiety to disclaim too great freedom of thought. Now, for the atomists, at least, there could be no such obscurantist leanings. While formally acknowledging the possible existence of superhuman beings, their theory left no place for gods in any true sense of the word. In a world where the atoms alone were eternal, where necessity and mechanical law alone ruled, there could be neither creation nor providence nor immortality. Democritus, in fact, boldly explained theology as a primitive personification of natural objects. At the time when Democritus taught, which seems to have been in the last third of the 5th century B.C., ethics was, as it still continues to be, much less advanced than physical science. But the facts of moral experience being better known, left less room for error. Thus what he had to say on the subject took the form of proverbial philosophy, of short sentences, true so far as they go, but not worked up into systematic form. They are not inspired by the great social enthusiasm of Plato and the Stoics, but neither is there the low standard vulgarly supposed to go with philosophical materialism. The highest end is declared to be a contented mind, which is won by avoiding excess, and by fixing the desires not on sensual indulgences, but on imperishable things. Sins are to be avoided not from fear, but from a sense of duty. Goodness is not abstinence from doing wrong, but from the wish to do wrong. Encouragement and persuasion are a better training to virtue than law and compulsion. The whole world is the fatherland of a good soul. Yet our aphorist is too genuine a Greek to merge political duty in a vague cosmopolitanism. He tells us to put the interests of the state above all others, not grasping at more power for ourselves than is good for the community. For a well administered city best secures the safety of all. Democritus has been called the laughing philosopher, because a late legend describes him as always making merry over the follies and vices of mankind. As it happens, this silly story is sufficiently answered by one of his own maxims. Men should not laugh, but mourn over each other's misfortunes. And to those who know Heracleitus at first hand, the parallel designation of him as the weeping philosopher must seem an equally infelicitous description of his lofty contempt for the common herd. End of section 8.